Israeli Navy intercepts most vessels in the global summit flotilla to Gaza. Egypt reaffirms steadfast support for Sudan. And 4 injured in attack near Manchester synagogue. The suspect is shot by the police. Good afternoon and welcome to Q News. I'm Mark Summers. So to our top story this afternoon, Israeli naval forces intercepted most vessels in the global summit flotilla to Gaza. According to flotilla organizers, 21 ships have been halted, while 18 more are out of contact and presumed intercepted. The Makino vessel, closest to Gaza, lost communication this morning, and its location is unknown. The Marionette vessel remains in touch, but is furthest from Gaza and expected to face inspection soon. There was no immediate independent confirmation of the vessel's status. Meanwhile, Israel's foreign ministry said none of the global summit flotilla ships reached Gaza, as Israeli media reported the Navy seized 40-plus ships. According to Israeli media, the Navy intercepted more than 40 boats attempting to breach the blockade, with hundreds of activists taken to Ashdod. Authorities said those detained face a choice of voluntary departure or legal proceedings that could lead to forced deportation. There was no immediate independent verification of the total numbers.
We demand that they stand trial for their crimes against humanity. This heinous attack.
The European Commission says it's closely tracking reports of the Israeli forces boarding the global summit flotilla ships, urging respect for international law and maritime rules. Brussels stressed adherence to international law, navigation norms and maritime regulations in handling the convoy. It also noted appreciation for the flotilla's role in highlighting Gaza's humanitarian crisis, saying such initiatives underscore the urgent need for global attention to Palestinian suffering. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry condemned the Israeli occupation army's assault on the global summit flotilla, calling it a breach of international law and humanitarian principles. Ramallah said the flotilla has the right to sail in Palestinian waters to deliver aid and urged the international community to protect the convoy. It called for activating accountability mechanisms against Israel for obstructing humanitarian relief and violating navigation and humanitarian norms. The UK Foreign Office expressed concern over Israel's interception of the Gaza-bound flotilla, urging a safe resolution and support for humanitarian delivery. London said it is in touch with families of several British participants and stressed that any aid should be transferred to recognised humanitarian organisations for safe delivery into Gaza. The UK added it has urged Israeli authorities to handle the situation safely and responsibly. Turkey's President Erdogan condemned Israel's interception of the global summit flotilla bound for Gaza, calling it banditry against civilians in international waters. Speaking in Ankara, Erdogan said the raid shows that Netanyahu and the government seeks to hide crimes in Gaza and has no tolerance for peace prospects. He vowed Ankara is monitoring developments by the second, with relevant units taking steps to ensure no harm comes to activists or Turkish citizens involved in the flotilla.
Sayın AK Parti Genel Başkanı
Gaza health authorities say the death toll has surpassed 66,200, with more than 168,900 wounded, 77 dead, and 222 injured were recorded in the past 24 hours. The Gaza Ministry of Health reported hospitals received 77 bodies and 222 wounded in the last day. It added fatalities from strikes on aid centres have risen to more than 2,400, with more than 17,700 injured. The figures are issued by Gaza-based authorities amid ongoing Israeli military operations. Israeli bulldozers cleared land near Beit al-Fawqa in the West Bank for new settlements, further fragmenting Palestinian areas and restricting movement. Local reports say the clearing tightens access and adds to settlement expansion across the occupied West Bank. The move comes as US President Donald Trump advances a plan to end the Gaza conflict and sketch a path to Palestinian statehood, while Palestinians contend with growing obstacles to land and livelihoods. The International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC, has temporarily halted operations in Gaza City due to escalating hostilities, relocating staff to southern Gaza offices for safety. Tens of thousands of civilians face dire conditions with limited access to aid. The ICRC continues supporting medical facilities and first responders from Deir el-Balah and Rafah and urges an immediate ceasefire to protect civilians and ensure humanitarian access. The situation in Gaza has worsened significantly over the past few days, with deadly Israeli airstrikes, growing internal instability, and a deepening humanitarian crisis. At least 16 Palestinians have been killed in recent air raids across Gaza City and central refugee camps, including paramedics and journalists. As the bombing campaign intensifies, northern Gaza in particular is teetering on the edge of famine. The closure of the Zikim aid route earlier this month has severely restricted the flow of food and medical supplies, forcing community kitchens to slash daily meals from over 150,000 to fewer than 60,000. In a sign of deteriorating safety conditions, the International Committee of the Red Cross has now suspended operations in Gaza City and relocated its staff to southern regions. Amid this, power dynamics inside Gaza are shifting. Hamas is no longer the sole force in control, as Israeli-backed militia groups like the Popular Forces have begun asserting themselves, especially in areas where aid is being distributed. These groups have been accused of looting, extortion, and targeting rival factions, further eroding civilian security. Hamas, increasingly under pressure, has responded violently to these threats, executing suspected collaborators and launching retaliatory attacks, leading to hundreds of deaths in internal fighting over the past year. With the governing authority weakened and no unified alternative in place, the region is sliding into a dangerous security vacuum. Meanwhile, international diplomacy is ramping up. A new 20-point Gaza peace proposal, championed by President Trump and accepted by Israel, is now on the table. It calls for a full disarmament of Hamas, an exchange of hostages and detainees, a phased Israeli withdrawal, and the creation of a Palestinian technocratic authority to govern Gaza under international supervision. Trump has given Hamas what he described as 3 or 4 days to respond, warning of a very sad end if they reject it. Arab states have cautiously welcomed the plan, though some, like Egypt and Qatar, remain wary of its enforcement. Hamas has yet to make an official statement, but internal sources suggest significant resistance to the plan's terms, particularly those that imply surrender of arms and international oversight. Now let's go back to the story of the flotilla and cross over to our newsroom with Mona.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. And for further analysis, we're joined from Cairo by international relations specialist Dr. Mohammed Osman. Dr. Mohammed Osman, welcome to Q News. We've all followed the ongoing developments of the Sumud flotilla. Now, what do you have on Israel's claim that none of the flotilla's ships reached Gaza, despite facts that the organizers said that they were halted and that 18 were missing, they lost contact with 18 of the ships and they were intercepted. What do you have on that? How does this make of Israel, and how do you think this would reshape the international perception of Israel's and of its blockade on Gaza?
Thank you for having me, Mona. Of course, Israeli sources in general cannot be trusted, but we do know for a fact that the flotilla did not reach the Gaza Strip, that it was intercepted in the very close proximity of the territorial waters of the Gaza Strip and Israel. There were about 44 vessels. Israel claims that it has intercepted and captured and controlled about the entirety of the flotilla, while some reports say that they only captured about 39. However, we do know for a fact that none of the ships or the vessels have reached Gaza for sure. And of course, we do know that Israel has detained about 400 people, over 400 people, the participants in this humanitarian flotilla that was heading to Gaza, and now they are in Israeli custody in the Ashdod port. Of course, this is nothing new. This is part of Israel's campaign to stifle the entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza. They are imposing the blockade. They are impeding the entry of humanitarian aid from the crossings, whether with Egypt or from within Israel, in violation of international law. And of course, this is not the first vessel to be intercepted. Various vessels before and various flotillas attempted to penetrate the Gaza Strip and end the blockade or that is imposed by Israel on the Palestinian people in Gaza. However, of course, all of these vessels were intercepted and were violently attacked by the Israelis, as was the case yesterday with what happened with the 44 ships. So, and of course, this does harm Israel's image in the international community. Definitely, it does portray it as a pariah state, as it really is a pariah state and is acting as such. But as long as the Israelis, as we always said before, Mona, enjoy the unconditional support of the United States, they will get away with a lot of their bad deeds.
Now, the European Commission has called for a respect to the maritime law. How will that development, or how will that incident reflect on the EU-Israel relations?
Of course, it will have a detrimental effect on EU relations with Israel. We just knew that Israel has postponed the EU has postponed talks about imposing sanctions on Israel upon the request, of course, of none other than Germany, the core supporter of Israel, even though Germany does have reservations on Israel's actions, naturally, with regards to what's going on in Gaza, yet they refuse to impose any substantial pressure on the Israelis. Unfortunately, Mona, they refuse recognition of the Palestinians, and they also refuse to punish Israel on account of its actions and its behavior. So, of course, probably the flotilla incident will anger the Europeans, because many of those who have been arrested are European citizens, and this is not the first time this happened, Mona, and also because some of them are in harm's way. Some of them even are famous activists like Greta Thunberg and others. However, of course, and one of them also is a member of the French Parliament, ironically. However, as we all know, Israel will get away with this just as it did get away with genocide, which is the worst crime, the crime of crimes, as one may call it, So if they can get away with this, then they can get away with intercepting a flotilla.
Exactly, exactly. How, from your point of view, such incidents would reflect on the image of Israel worldwide and the international communities, and how nations will see the real image of Israel in light of such an incident? And how do you think this flotilla incident would raise the awareness about the Gaza humanitarian crisis?
Of course, it does place a spotlight on the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and it does show how dire it is and how Israel enjoys absolute impunity. Hopefully, such incidents will push the European publics to pressure their governments further to punish Israel on account of its actions. Of course, but I think that at the same time, Israel does not really care about what the Europeans think. They think that this is a summer cloud of some sort that will dissipate with time, and that they can actually handle the backlash of what's going on, or so they believe, at least. And maybe the Israelis could be delusional. Maybe it could not be just as simple as just the problems just going away on their own. This is a very valid possibility. However, of course, we cannot really count much on promises to escalate against Israel or punish Israel, because we have heard so many such promises before, Mona, and we were disappointed, unfortunately.
And that raises big question mark, Ms. Osman here. How effective are the international accountability mechanisms?
Unfortunately, they are not effective, because the United States provides Israel with immunity and impunity at the same time. So Israel now is being investigated in the International Court of Justice on account of its violation of the Genocide Convention. Prime Minister Netanyahu is a wanted criminal at the moment, and he is at large. He's loose, even though there's an arrest warrant against him. It's not being applied because the United States is actually persecuting the International Criminal Court and imposing sanctions on it. So, which is rather very, very ironic, sadly ironic, I would say, Mona. So unfortunately, there aren't any clear or effective pathways of accountability at the moment, even though the UN Human Rights Council, through its independent commission, has determined that Israel is committing genocide in the Gaza Strip, yet they cannot do much further, because the Security Council is the only UN body that can impose sanctions and punish Israel. And of course, we know that this is paralyzed by the work of the US veto, which is always there to be used as if Israel has its own veto in the UN Security Council, unfortunately, Mona. Even just now, I've just read the news that the Belgian government has summoned the Belgian ambassador on account of the interception of the flotilla. However, it doesn't seem that Israel cares much about what the Europeans do.
Well, that is exactly why we're asking, do the Europeans have any kind of influence or leverage to pressure any kind of pressures to on Israel to get aid into Israel, and in what ways might these developments complicate or pressure ongoing ceasefire or humanitarian negotiations?
It will definitely complicate the ceasefire negotiations. It gives Israel, unfortunately, Israel uses such incidents in order to deflect attention from the subject at hand, the true important subject, which is the reaching of a ceasefire in accordance with the Trump plan, which is very, very flawed. There are reservations on the plan. However, it's the only workable solution that is on the table at the moment. Israel, of course, is trying to stall as much as it can. And of course, if we are dragged into side arguments about flotillas and humanitarian aid and turning the Palestinian problem from a political issue into a humanitarian issue is the Israeli aim, Mona, because basically it deflects attention from all the important questions that are to be posed when the war ends. Whether the two-state solution will be still up for grabs, whether we should resume the peace process. All of these are questions that Israel would rather not answer because their answer is no. And this will complicate the relationship with many countries around the world, including the European nations, of course. So at the same time, so these are things that Israel would rather deflect attention from as much as they can. However, they cannot do this for long, Mona. The world is awakening, and everyone sees Israel for what it really is, a pariah state that is bent on acting like a rogue state, and it is actually a rogue state. And sooner or later, Israel will pay for the price for its violations, because nothing lasts forever, and U.S. hegemony itself will not last forever, and history will never forgive Israel for what it has done over the past 7+ decades, and of course, in particular, what it is doing now.
Right. That was Mr. Mohammed Osman, International Relations Specialist. Thank you so much for joining us here on Q News. And now we get back to you, Mark, in our studios. Mark.
Well, he's there in our newsroom. Now moving to Sudan, and in Wad Ramli near Khartoum, villagers have waded through floodwaters and used boats to rescue belongings after heavy flooding submerged homes and farmland. The Sudanese Red Crescent said the number of affected families is still under assessment, with the main road cut off, isolating the community. Onion crops, a key local product, suffered devastating losses, with thousands of sacks destroyed. Government response remains unclear, as Khartoum officials offered no comment. Already crippled by civil war and mass displacement, Sudan faces worsening annual floods that deepen hunger. Acting on the directives of Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, Foreign Minister Badr Abdel Ati met Sudan's Abdel Fattah al-Burhan in Port Sudan, reaffirming Egypt's steadfast support. Abdel Ati conveyed President el-Sisi's greetings, noting this is his third visit this year, and underscored solidarity with Sudan's sovereignty, security and armed forces. He highlighted joint work on a ceasefire, economic cooperation and Nile water security. Al-Burhan praised Egypt's consistent backing and historic fraternal ties. Egypt's Foreign Minister Badr Abdel Ati has reaffirmed Egypt's backing for Sudan's unity, sovereignty and armed forces, while stressing Cairo's active engagement in ceasefire and humanitarian initiatives. That came as he met Sudanese Prime Minister Kemal Idris in Port Sudan. Abdel Ati said his third visit to the city within a year underscored Egypt's solidarity with Sudan and support for government efforts to restore stability. Both sides discussed enhancing economic and trade ties, convening joint forums, facilitating Sudanese in Egypt, and reaffirmed their united Nile stance against unilateral actions. Egypt's Foreign Minister Badr Abdel Ati has met with the Sudanese Foreign Minister in Port Sudan. Abdel Ati reaffirmed the deep ties between the two nations, highlighting Egypt's active role in efforts to help fighting and secure humanitarian relief. He stressed Egypt's solidarity with Sudan's unity, sovereignty and institutions, particularly in its armed forces. Discussions also covered joint support for lifting the siege of El Fasher, expanding economic and trade cooperation, and maintaining a unified Nile position, rejecting unilateral measures and underscoring adherence to international law. Russia has accused the EU and NATO states of using the Russian threat rhetoric to prepare provocations and justify bigger military budgets, said the MFA spokeswoman Maria Zakharova. Speaking to reporters Zakharova claimed Western statements point to a chain of provocations and an effort to defend higher defense spending. She offered no evidence. Western governments say their posture reflects deterrence and support for Ukraine following Russia's invasion. Denmark's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen warned Russia will only stop its war if forced to, as she hosted a 47-nation EPC summit in Copenhagen, focused on European security. With President Volodymyr Zelensky attending, leaders stressed sustained pressure on Moscow. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer urged responding with everything we have, while France's Emmanuel Macron pressed action against Russia's shadow fleet. Maya Sandu said Moscow failed to sway Moldova's vote via disinformation and vote buying, accusations the Kremlin denies, blaming limited polling access for its diaspora.
Russia will not stop until they are forced to do so.
British police say 4 people were injured after stabbings and a car was driven at pedestrians near a Manchester synagogue. Armed officers shot the suspected attacker. Greater Manchester police were called to Heaton Park Hebrew congregation in Crumpsall after reports a car hit members of the public and a man was stabbed. Armed officers shot a man believed to be the offender. Verified video shows police firing inside the synagogue perimeter. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, condemned the attack, noting its occurrence on Yom Kippur. And just before we go, time to recap the main headlines this afternoon. Israeli Navy intercepts most vessels in the global Sumud flotilla to Gaza. Egypt reaffirms steadfast support for Sudan. And as we've just been hearing, 4 have been injured in an attack near Manchester synagogue. The suspect has been shot by the police. And that's all for now, but don't forget you can follow Q News on our social media platforms, YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok at QNews EGY. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more In Depth is next here on Q News.